World War I, also known as the First World War, was a global war centered in Europe. The war lasted for 4 years, 3 months and 2 weeks. It began on July the 28th and lasted until November the 11th, 1918. Before World War II began in 1938, World War I was called the Great War, the war to end all wars, or the World War. 135 countries took part and more than 17 million people died. It involved nearly all the biggest powers of the world, separated by 2 alliances, the Allies, Russia, France, British Empire, Italy, United States, Romania, Japan, Belgium, Serbia, Greece, Portugal and Montenegro, and the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria and Turkey. The war was fought on every ocean and nearly every continent. Still, most of the fighting took place in Europe. Since we, as Europeans, are the ones that wrote history, even though most of the Asian world is missing from the war, we said 2/3 of the world being engaged in a war is close enough to be called World War. The war didn't just start overnight. There was some build-up. In 1914, Europe was divided between 2 major alliance systems, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. The Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy. However, Italy left, so it became the Dual Alliance, and the Triple Entente consisted of Great Britain, Russia and France. A second step towards war was made decades before. There was an arms race between Germany and Great Britain, a naval arms race that Britain won in 1914. It had 38 dreadnoughts and dreadnought battle cruisers to Germany's 24. The army size was quite different before the war. Russia and France together had 1 million more troops than Germany and Austria-Hungary combined, and if you were to include Britain's peacetime force of 250,000 people, the Triple Entente had more manpower than the Dual Alliance. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 set Serbia on the stage as an empowered nationalistic state. It has Slavic intention, and those intentions ran counter to Austria-Hungary's imperial ambitions. Any conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia would mean also conflict between Austria-Hungary and Russia, or at least threatened involvement, because Russians had a sympathy to Serbia and its nationalism. Reasons of the Great War are many, deep, complicated. There isn't just one. You couldn't even name a list of causes. Still, there was a chain of events that directly led to the fighting. To this day, the root causes are a continued debate and discussion. The list is just an overview. I'm going to name popular reasons cited for the emergence of World War I. Mutual defense alliances. Over time, countries throughout Europe made mutual defense agreements that would pull them into battle. These treaties meant that if one country was attacked, allied countries were bound to defend them. Before World War I, the following alliances existed: Russia and Serbia, Germany and Austria-Hungary, France and Russia, Britain, France and Belgium, Japan and Britain. So, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia got involved to defend Serbia, Germany, seeing Russia mobilizing, declared war on Russia, France was then drawn in against Germany and Austria-Hungary, Germany attacked France through Belgium, pulling Britain into war, then Japan entered the war, later Italy and the United States would enter on the side of the Allies. A second reason would be empire building. Imperialism is when a country increases their power and wealth by bringing additional territories under their control. Before World War I, Africa and parts of Asia were points of contention among the European countries. This is true because of the riches these areas could provide. Increasing competition and desire for greater empires led to an increase in confrontation that helped push the world into the Great War. Nationalism. Much of the origin of the war was based on the desire of the Slavic people of Bosnia and Herzegovina to no longer be part of Austria-Hungary, but instead be part of Serbia. In this way, nationalism led directly to war, but in a more general way. Nationalism was present in all European countries. It helped not only the beginning, but the extension of the war in Europe. Each country trying to prove their dominance, power, imposing their way of life as the right way of life, and the supremacy of a single country all over Europe, if not the world. Militarism. As the world entered the 20th century and the arms race began, by 1914 Germany had the greatest increase in military buildup. Great Britain and Germany both greatly increased their navies in this time. Further, in Germany and Russia, the military establishment began to have a greater influence on the public policy. This increase in militarism helped push the countries involved into war. Countries were building their military forces, arms, training people, and building battleships. Countries either wanted to regain lost territories or to expand their empire. Fifth reason, the Bosnian crisis. Austria-Hungary took over the Turkish province of Bosnia in 1909, angry in Serbia. Next, in 1911, we have the Moroccan crisis, when, get this, not the French but the Germans were protesting against the French people for occupying their Morocco. And finally, the seventh reason, the immediate assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his pregnant wife Sophie in Sarajevo while on a visit. The immediate cause of the World War I that made the aforementioned items come into play, alliances, militarism, imperialism, nationalism, was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. In 1914, a Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke. The group was Serbian, it wasn't backed by the Serbian government, it wasn't stopped either, they just turned a blind eye. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was in Serbia to try lessen the tensions between the countries, and he got involved in an assassination attempt. The first attempt failed when the driver avoided a grenade thrown at their car. However, later that day, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated him and his pregnant wife while in Sarajevo, Bosnia, part of Austria-Hungary. This was in protest to Austria-Hungary having control of this region, Serbia wanting to take over Bosnia and Herzegovina. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and the heir to the throne of Austria and Hungary. He was assassinated on a Sunday, on 28th of June 1914, around 11 a.m. in the morning. The assassination precipitated the July Crisis. The July Crisis was a month of negotiations, ultimatums between countries, shameful ones that couldn't be accepted, and the first war declaration was between Austria-Hungary and Serbia on 28th of July 1914. This after Germany signed a blank check to Austria-Hungary saying that it will get 199% involved in the war, which it did. And so it begins. The declaration caused a domino effect in the alliance system, each declaration causing another declaration of war. Russia mobilized her army. This just to be safe thing was seen by the Germans as declaration of war, so it declared war. The German war plan was called the Schleifen Plan and required Germany to defeat France in just 6 weeks to avoid a two-front war, which it failed to do because the plan itself was flawed. The plan hinged on 8 invisible virtual divisions. They did not exist, and later it was outmaneuvered at the Battle of Marne, which kind of sealed the end of the war for Germany. 3/4 of the British government were for absolute non-interference at any price, and according to the Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, Britain was not required by any treaty to support France or Russia in the event of war with Germany, and many British politicians were against intervention. Still, Britain declared war on Germany on August the 4th, after Germany invaded Belgium. It was obliged to do that by the Treaty of London of 1838. On the 1st of November 1914, the Ottoman Empire, which still existed, declared war on the German alliance side. Russia, followed soon by France, and Britain was compelled to declare war on the Ottoman Empire when it joined the Central Powers in August, signing the Turkish-German alliance. Mobilization and recruitment. On 30th of July 1914, Tsar Nicholas II agreed to a full mobilization of the Russian army. This was seen as the declaration of war, and Germany declared war on Russia on the 1st of August. Still, Russia was able to call for the largest army in its first day, 5 million people. Germany was second, 4.5 million people, followed by France with 3.7 million people. Britain only had an army of 733,000 men, but in 1918 the war count stood at 3,002,000 people. And this is in part to Lord Kitchener's ad campaign. He saw that the British army was far too small compared to the French or German forces and wanted to build a 7 divisions army. He called for 200,000 men to sign up for the British army in the first month of war, and more than 300,000 men enlisted. They were kids. War represented an adventure for the new recruits. The ad campaign and general consensus was that we'll be home by Christmas, less than half a year. Finally, more men joined the army by their own free will than after the introduction of conscription in 1916. Around 2.5 million people volunteered, approximately a quarter of the total British eligible men. Almost a million British men appealed against their conscription in the first 6 months. Most were granted exemption of some sort, even if it was only temporary. Often white feather was given to those who refused to fight out of principle alone. Still, Britain, on paper, could have had such a big army that it would be absolutely impossible for someone to win against them. It was the British Empire. It had over 400 million people that it could have called out to war. In India alone, it had 300 million people. A quarter of that 400 million would have meant 100 million men joining the war. Germany finally sent to war 13 million people. Comparing that to 100 million people, it would have been a landslide. So the war was lost the second Germany poked the British bear. By December 1915, around 30% of Scottish men aged 15 to 49 had volunteered. In the end, over a quarter of all Scots who enlisted became casualties. In 1917, the conditions got so dire that the Russian government opened battalions of death, troops made entirely by women. The role was shaming men that they were not going to war or shaming them into fighting harder. These battalions rarely saw the battleground. In total, during the war, 13.4 million Germans went to war, and it's written in history as the biggest amount of people sent by any country involved in the war. Finally, in 1917, USA joins the war reluctantly. It needed 5 reasons to get moving. And we know finally that the United States played a crucial role in the following peace treaty. Still, the country tried to remain neutral throughout most of the conflict, which it regarded as a European war. By 1917, Woodrow Wilson, which campaigned against war policy, elect me and I won't send you to war, changed his mind along with public opinion in favor of the US entry into war for the following 5 reasons, how I said earlier. First, German atrocities in Belgium. One factor that had a huge influence over the American public opinion was the word of mouth or news regarding the atrocity Germans made when they entered peaceful Belgium. Stories of unarmed civilians being killed and small towns being destroyed circulated throughout the press. Although some or most of these stories were British propaganda, untrue, they left a strong anti-German feeling among Americans. The next and stronger reason, economic interest. The American businessmen were very interested in the Allied victory, and many such as JP Morgan helped fund the British and French with approximately 3 billion in 100 years ago dollars in loans and bond purchases. If the Allies would be defeated by the Central Powers, they would have had no reason to repay those 3 billions. The people you backed lost, so there's nobody to pay you back. They wouldn't be able to repay their debt to the US. Many businessmen therefore supported the so-called preparedness movement, which campaigned for the US intervention in the war on the side of Allied forces. Third reason, sinking of Lusitania. In May 1915, a German submarine, a U-boat, sank the British passenger ship Lusitania, which had weapons on board, but also had 1,000 people, 128 of those being American. The general practice when a situation like this would have occurred was, hey, we are the Germans, we caught you, we see you have weapons, give them to us, and go on your merry way. They didn't do that, they just sunk the battleship. The sinking further increased anti-German sentiment in America. Next one, we have unrestricted submarine warfare. In response to the British blockade, which meant disruption of the infrastructure, weapon supply, food supply, any kind of supply, the Germans started their own type of blockade on the sea. After the sinking of Lusitania, Germany promised to stop unrestricted submarine warfare, but within less than 1 year, they torpedoed another passenger ship, the cross-English Channel ferry Sussex. Again, the Germans promised not to attack passenger ships without warning. They signed the Sussex Pledge, but the pledge was short-lived as well. Fifth and final reason, the Zimmermann telegraph. In 1917, German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico suggesting that if the US should declare war on Germany, Mexico should declare war on the US in return. Mexico would get back the territory lost in the Mexican-American War, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Unfortunately for Germany, the telegram was intercepted by the British intelligence and happily given to the Americans. Although Mexico had no intention of declaring war to the USA, the publication of the letter further mobilized the American people against the Central Powers, and having 5 big reasons to start, and the people behind you, they declared war. War was full of life in the first month since it began. It had 2 fronts, Western and Eastern. It consisted of bold attacks and rapid troop movements on both fronts. In the West, Germany attacked first Belgium and then France. In the East, Russia attacked both Germany and Austria-Hungary. In the South, Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia, but following the Battle of Marne, 5 to 9 September 1914, the Western Front became entrenched in central France and remained that way for the rest of the war. The rest of the fronts in the east also gradually locked into place. And so the first part of the Great War ends. There are another 3 parts regarding weaponry, major battles, and aftermath, which I invite you to wait and follow. That's all for today. I'm waiting your heartfelt comments in the comment section below. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. You could also hit the notification bell. And until next time, I'm fearing falling apples.